India has just signed a monumental $95 billion economic partnership with Canada. This marks a seismic shift, as it highlights a country long courted by the United States as the cornerstone of its Indo-Pacific strategy. India, the nation whose alignment was expected to anchor American power in Asia for the next century, turned its gaze elsewhere. India, home to 4 billion people and the fifth largest economy on Earth, looked at the United States, considered its path, and made its choice: Canada. The significance of this move is not just in the dollar amount, but in the timing. 6 months ago, India and Canada were barely speaking. Diplomatic relations had reached their lowest point in decades after the Nijar affair, an intelligence scandal that led to expelled diplomats, accusations, and a breakdown of trust that normally takes years to repair. Yet the pressure of American economic coercion was so overwhelming, so total, that it forced India and Canada to set aside their differences. They rebuilt diplomatic bridges in a matter of months and signed the largest bilateral economic agreement in the history of both nations. What does it mean when nations that could barely stand each other decide that the larger problem lies outside their borders? The United States has united these countries in ways no adversary could. Warren Buffett aptly explained this as the moment the United States ceased to be the center of the global economy and became the very obstacle the world is building around. At the signing ceremony in New Delhi, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered a clear and powerful message to the world. India does not choose sides. India chooses partners, and today we have chosen. These words echoed around the globe with the quiet deliberation of a leader who represents 1/6 of humanity. This statement not only marked a pivotal shift in global geopolitics, but also posed a crucial question. Is this the end of the American century? Or can the United States still reclaim its place at the center of global trade? The $95 billion deal is not just a number. It's a roadmap for how nations are learning to bypass the United States entirely. The energy provisions alone are staggering, representing the largest bilateral energy commitment India has ever made with any single nation. India has committed to purchasing Canadian liquefied natural gas, LNG, crude oil, and uranium under long-term contracts totaling $68 billion over the next 15 years. These contracts directly challenge American energy ambitions that took decades to build. American LNG terminals were built with Indian demand projections in mind. American nuclear energy companies had been negotiating with Indian counterparts for years. Yet, all of this became obsolete with the stroke of a pen in New Delhi. India no longer needs American LNG or uranium. Canada can supply both at competitive prices without the baggage of tariffs and political threats. This is a blow to the United States, especially given that the U.S. had positioned itself as India's primary energy supplier after India began diversifying away from Russian sources following the Ukraine conflict. That position has now vanished, not weakened, but completely erased. The United States' hopes of maintaining energy dominance in India have been shattered. The provisions surrounding critical minerals further deepen the implications of this partnership. Canada and India have established a joint critical minerals processing corporation set to process Canadian nickel, cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements in Indian facilities. The finished components will feed India's booming electric vehicle industry, semiconductor packaging, defense manufacturing, and space programs. Crucially, this corporation operates entirely outside American supply chains. No American components, no American processing, no American oversight, no American export controls. For American companies that had been courting India's critical minerals sector, the announcement was a wake-up call. Their positions, which had been built on billions of dollars in investments and years of negotiations, no longer exist. The supply chain is set, and American companies are excluded. This is not a temporary shift. It's a permanent restructuring of global supply chains. The technology provisions in this deal are the most strategically significant. They represent a direct challenge to the sectors where American dominance has been least questioned. India and Canada have announced a joint semiconductor fabrication and packaging program. 3 facilities will be built in India, 1 in Canada, all designed to produce chips powering India's automotive, telecommunications, defense, and industrial sectors. And here's the kicker. These facilities will not use American lithography equipment. This is a direct snub to the U.S. and its efforts to onshore semiconductor manufacturing. The U.S. has spent years trying to revive its semiconductor industry, passing the CHIPS Act and offering billions in subsidies. But here are India and Canada, building a parallel ecosystem that explicitly excludes American technology, American equipment, and American oversight. This is not just competition. This is the creation of an entirely separate technological universe, one where American companies like Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI are no longer essential. They are no longer the default. Furthermore, India and Canada have established a joint artificial intelligence research initiative funded at $4.7 billion over the next 10 years. This initiative, headquartered in Bangalore with a mirror facility in Toronto, will develop AI capabilities outside the American technology ecosystem. This is more than just competition. This is the creation of an alternative AI landscape that does not depend on American leadership. This new partnership also addresses one of India's most vulnerable points: food security for 4 billion people. The agricultural provisions make Canada India's primary external agricultural partner, with long-term contracts for Canadian wheat, pulses, lentils, canola, and potash flowing to India over the next 20 years. Price stability mechanisms have been put in place, ensuring India's food security is safeguarded for decades to come. For the United States, this is a crushing blow. India, once its second-largest agricultural supplier, has now turned to Canada for 2 decades. The American agricultural lobby, one of the most powerful constituencies in American politics, is already calculating the damage. There is no way to reverse this. These are long-term contracts with penalty clauses and volume commitments. The door is shut. In the defense and security realm, this deal represents India's gradual shift away from American weapon systems toward a co-development model with Canada. The deal includes joint procurement and co-development frameworks for naval vessels, Arctic patrol capabilities, surveillance drones, and cybersecurity infrastructure. But more than that, it allows India to manufacture Canadian-designed defense systems domestically. This is the kind of technology transfer the United States had promised India for years, but only with restrictive conditions. Canada, however, has offered genuine technology sharing that builds India's defense capabilities without creating dependence. The implications for the U.S. military are profound. India, one of the largest militaries in the world, is slowly but surely decoupling from American military technology. Once that decoupling is complete, it will be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to reverse. For the Pentagon, this is a nightmare scenario. Finally, the financial architecture of this deal contains a provision that could erode American financial dominance. India and Canada have established a bilateral currency settlement mechanism, allowing trade to be conducted in Indian rupees and Canadian dollars without the need to convert through the US dollar. This is not a full currency swap, but it is a strategic move that reduces the reliance on the dollar for $95 billion in trade. Multiply this approach across Canada's partnerships with Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, and now India, and you begin to see a world where global trade is conducted without the need for US dollars. This gradual erosion of dollar dominance may not cause an immediate rupture, but it will slowly chip away at the structural advantage the dollar holds in the global economy. This is the death of 1,000 cuts for dollar hegemony. 6 months ago, the idea of India forging such a partnership with Canada would have been unthinkable. In September of the previous year, relations between India and Canada hit rock bottom after Canada accused Indian intelligence agents of involvement in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Sikh activist on Canadian soil. India denied the allegations vehemently. Diplomatic expulsions ensued, intelligence sharing was suspended, and tensions reached a boiling point. The crisis was real, bitter, and deeply personal. But then, something remarkable happened. The reconciliation began with a single phone call in January, initiated by Mark Carney and received by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The call lasted 47 minutes. No aides were present. Within 2 weeks, back-channel negotiations were underway in Singapore. In 3 months, the Nijjar dispute was resolved through a confidential bilateral mechanism, and diplomatic personnel were reinstated. The speed of this reconciliation stunned even the most seasoned diplomats, as such crises typically take years to diffuse. India and Canada had compressed years of tension into just a few months. Why did this happen? Because both nations looked at the United States and concluded that American economic coercion posed a greater threat than their unresolved bilateral grievances. The United States' actions had pushed them together. This is a devastating indictment of the U.S. foreign policy approach. For India, the decision to align with Canada was not about closing old wounds, but about confronting a far bigger threat: the risk of economic suffocation at the hands of the United States. India watched the United States impose tariffs on Canada, on Europe, and on the United Kingdom. It watched as Washington demanded an astonishing $2, $7 trillion from Canada, using fabricated methodologies. India observed as countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Germany all began to view American economic policies not as strategic tools, but as economic coercion. It was in this context that the United States imposed tariffs on India's steel, textiles, pharmaceuticals, and imposed restrictions on the vital H-1B visa program, a program that had long connected India's technology sector with Silicon Valley. The tariffs were economic. The visa restrictions were personal, and personal cuts, as Modi knew, run deeper than economic ones. Modi's calculation was simple. When the largest economy in the world imposes tariffs on your steel, your textiles, your medicine, and restricts the visa program that connects your technology industry to the global market, remaining neutral is not a demonstration of strategic patience. It's self-harm. This was the turning point. With India's departure from the U.S.-dominated economic sphere, the map of American strategic isolation is now complete. Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and now India have all created or are building economic structures that function without the United States. The Indo-Pacific strategy is now defunct, and the Quad, a coalition designed to contain China, has been dismantled, not by China, but by American tariffs. The United States was not displaced by China, it was routed around. The global economy looked at the obstacle in its path and did what water does when it encounters a stone. It flowed around it. The stone is still sitting exactly where it was, wondering why the river has moved elsewhere. Alternative supply chains are already built. Factories are staffed, contracts signed. The switching costs are sunk, and no reversal of tariffs, no diplomatic initiative, and no change in tone or leadership will unsync these systems. This moment, as Warren Buffett said, is irreversible. Narendra Modi's words, "India does not choose sides. India chooses partners. And today, we have chosen." Were not just a statement of intent. They marked the moment the American century ended. Not with a war, not with a crisis, and not with a defeat, but with a choice made calmly, rationally, and sovereignly by the nation whose alignment had been expected to guarantee the continuation of that century. India's decision to partner with Canada will be remembered as the day when the American century faltered and a new, multipolar global order began to take shape. The deal between Canada and India, now known as one of the most significant shifts in global geopolitics, is not just about trade agreements or economic strategies. It represents the end of an era where the United States stood unchallenged at the center of the global economy. What has occurred over the past few months as India and Canada forge a partnership that bypasses the United States in energy, technology, defense, and trade is a profound transformation in how nations view American power. This deal signals that nations are no longer simply aligning with or against the United States in a binary manner. They are choosing alternatives that allow them to bypass Washington's influence. The $95 billion economic partnership between Canada and India is not an isolated incident. It is part of a broader pattern that has seen nations like Germany, Japan, South Korea, and Australia slowly but surely diversify away from American economic and political dominance. The diplomatic implications are also immense. The United States has long viewed its relationships with allies as partnerships, with Washington as the undisputed leader. But with this deal, India has sent a clear signal. The old alliances built on American dominance are being restructured. Countries no longer look to Washington for guidance. They are increasingly looking to one another to more equal partnerships. India's shift to Canada marks a new era where influence is no longer exerted solely by the United States. Rather, countries are creating their own spheres of influence, often with little regard for Washington's wishes. Perhaps the most stunning aspect of this shift is the effect it has had on global financial markets. The United States, long accustomed to controlling global trade through the dollar, now faces a growing number of trade agreements where the US dollar is not involved. The mechanism for currency settlement between Canada and India is just the beginning. Other countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan, have begun similar initiatives to bypass the dollar in their bilateral trade. This slow erosion of dollar dominance is one of the most significant long-term consequences of the Canada-India deal. It is not a dramatic rupture, but a steady, compounding shift that will slowly undermine the structural advantages the U.S. has held over the global financial system. As more countries move away from dollar-based transactions, the world will witness a gradual decline in the dollar's hegemony. For the United States, this is a bitter pill to swallow. The decades of being able to use its financial dominance to exert influence and pressure on other nations are now being challenged. The global economy is finding ways to function without the U.S. at the center. The $95 billion deal between Canada and India serves as a stark reminder that the world is changing and the U.S. is no longer the undisputed leader. The shift is not just economic, it is strategic. Countries that once relied on the United States for security, energy, and technology are now making decisions that reflect a new reality. The Quad, the Indo-Pacific alliance that was supposed to counter China, has become increasingly irrelevant as countries like India decide to act independently of U.S. interests. The new global order is not defined by Washington's terms, but by the emerging power dynamics of independent nations forging their own paths. India's decision to partner with Canada is a defining moment in this new global landscape. It is not just about the specific provisions of the deal, the energy commitments, the defense partnerships, or the semiconductor initiatives. It is about the broader shift in global thinking, the realization that the United States no longer holds all the cards. Nations are looking beyond Washington to build their own futures, and in doing so, they are reshaping the global economic and political order. The story of India's partnership with Canada has long been unwilling to offer. India, along with other nations, is now developing its own defense capabilities without American restrictions or interference. In terms of global trade, the deal marks a turning point, the introduction of a bilateral currency settlement mechanism between Canada and India, allowing trade to be conducted in rupees and Canadian dollars without the need for the U.S. dollar, is a small yet powerful step in the ongoing erosion of dollar hegemony. This mechanism does not declare war on the dollar, but it removes the dollar from $95 billion worth of trade. The implications of this shift will be felt in global financial markets as more countries explore similar alternatives, bypassing the need for the U.S. dollar in their transactions. The rise of these alternative currency mechanisms is not just an economic shift, it is a challenge to the very foundation of the global financial system. The dollar, which has long served as the world's reserve currency, now faces a gradual, unrelenting decline in its role as the central hub of global trade. The growing number of countries, including those in Europe, Asia, and beyond, using their own currencies or regional arrangements for trade, is a clear indication that the dollar is no longer the default choice. In the coming years, as this trend continues, the U.S. will find itself increasingly isolated, not by military power or overt economic force, but by the simple fact that the global economy has outgrown the need for American control. As nations like India, Canada, and others expand their economic independence, the American-led global order will give way to a more decentralized, multipolar system. This is a fundamental shift that cannot be reversed by tariffs, sanctions, or diplomatic pressure. The world is moving on, and the United States is being left behind in the wake of a new global order where economic power is shared more equitably. India's words at the signing ceremony, "India does not choose sides. India chooses partners," are not just a declaration of intent, they are a profound statement of the future. The U.S. may have once been the center of global power, but that is no longer the case. The global economic and political landscape is being reshaped before our eyes, and the shift is undeniable. The era of American dominance is over, not through defeat, but through the quiet rise of alternatives, partnerships, and new structures that no longer need Washington's consent.